Welcome everyone. I'm Marta. I'm going to be moderating the webinar today. I am joined by Alesia from the product team, and today we're going to be talking about transition quality and transition scoring. And the agenda today looks like this. We're going to start with an introduction about why quality assurance, transition quality assurance is important in your workflow. Then we're going to talk about a bit of the challenge that comes with it usually, which is cost, quality, and speed. We're going to show some examples and how it works. Also show a demo of what we're doing at Lokalise and some key takeaways at the end, of course, because nothing is wrapped without some conclusions. And at the very end, we'll have time for Q&A as well. So I hope you are excited. And as I said at the beginning, we're joined with Alesia, who is our product manager at Lokalise. She is building AI-based capabilities to improve our transition quality and reduce manual review, and obviously accelerate the continuous localization cycle. She has been in the localization industry for 5 years, over 5 years actually. And before she was in product management, she was a customer success manager. So that's quite an interesting background. She was guiding enterprise teams on best practices, and that has really helped her into translating these practical requirements into the product strategy by partnering closely with the customers. So a very interesting speaker with us today. And without further ado, the mic is yours, Alesia. We're going to start with transition quality.
Thank you very much, Marta, and it's a pleasure to have everyone here. I'm also very happy to see some familiar faces of our customers here. And I want to start today's webinar with the topic of importance of translation quality assurance, or TQA. And there is a really good example that can illustrate this. Like most of you probably know the company called Mercedes-Benz. It's a very known in the industry car manufacturing brand. And they wanted to enter China, the world's second largest luxury market, in 2009, which is a very reasonable step to do. And all they had to do is to come up with the name with the right type of spelling and representation for their brand. And this is where they came up with the name Benzi, which sounds phonetically as Benz. But later on, they figured out that it roughly translates as Rush to Die, which is a very bad naming logo for the company that is launching the car business in China. So in this case, later on, they fixed the mistake and they changed the branding and they changed the way how they spell the name to Benchi, which is roughly translates as Run Faster, which is a much nicer motto for the company. So in this case, we see how one mistake in localization quality, in translation quality, can lead to quite big outcomes. And in this case, it costed them millions of dollars. So these are the types of mistakes that we need to think about when we approach localization. At the same time, not all the cases are equal, and we are not always localizing the names of the brands, and not every case is as risky as this one. So today we'll speak about importance of quality assurance, but also on the different strategies which can help and apply in different cases to help you with localization quality assurance. And before we jump into the webinar content, I want to ask you guys, what is your biggest challenge when it comes to translation quality assurance at scale? This is where we should start seeing the poll, and I'll give you a few seconds maybe to show us, to highlight what are the challenges in each of your cases. I see that there are quite a few responses already, which is cool. We can keep it for some time. And I like that there is a variation of challenges. And as you probably could notice, there are different themes that are popping up in the responses. And some of them are centered around time, like review cycles are taking too long. Some of them are related to the quality, that it's hard to assess or hard to maintain consistent quality. And some of them are about costs. Because in this case, we are also needing to spend more effort on this task. So you can see the results also on the screen that there is there are pretty balanced responses around different parts, maybe a little bit less on the cost, but overall there is quite some uncertainty about and quite some issues with regards to the review cycles and quality. And as we've seen, in the responses, they're centered around these three themes, and it could be quite hard to balance three of them, or even maybe impossible, because you can have really, some people think that they can have really high quality by investing a lot of money into human review, and it can impact the speed. Or there can be other cases, like you can pick 2 out of 3 options. And for example, you can optimize for really fast translations, like affordable translations, but without much human review, which can impact the quality as well. So this is where scoring comes in place. And we'll try to tackle all of these 3 areas, which are causing current issues and uncertainty with scoring, one by one, which is cost, the quality, and speed. So we'll start with the cost. And before we jump into this topic, I want to quickly ask you guys another question about how does your team currently handle translation quality control? Now, this is where we should start seeing the poll as well. All right, I really like the traction and having so many responses. Thank you guys for being so active. And I really also like that we have a range of different use cases, because we see that it starts with reviewing everything and to reviewing nothing, which are pretty good strategies depending on the case. Like we can have customers who and content types which need to be really thoroughly checked. We can have some assets that for which it might be okay not to have a second round of review, and we can have everything in the middle between the two. So which strategy works the best? And this is how we propose to tackle it. So I'll try to visualize it on a graph, different strategies with regards to the review. And we can look first on the vertical axis, which presents the risks of not reviewing content. And depending on different dimensions, depending on how many people will see the content, depending on the type of industry, whether it's regulated industry, unregulated industry, if it's highly visible content or not, depending on how it's easy to revert a mistake, whether it's something that can be easily changed in the software or, for example, cannot be undone, we can have different degrees of risks. And on the horizontal axis, we can see the visibility of content, starting from low visibility content that probably only few customers or users will see. An example here could be internal documentation or maybe FAQs, and highly visible content that most of the customers see. So it can be related to some very highly visible articles or content pieces. And in this case, if we look at the Mercedes case that we discussed in the beginning, then we see that a Mercedes probably fits on the case, especially the case with the logo, with the name, fits very far on the right side in the top corner, because in this case that was highly visible content and there was very high risk of not reviewing that content. But not all the content of Mercedes is equal, and even within Mercedes-Benz content there can be different types of assets that can have lower degree of risk. And another extreme can be cases when the content is almost invisible and has very low risk. Let's an example could be some internal documentation in this case, in which case it might be perfectly reasonable not to review it. And we also have the other two extremes. We can have examples of highly visible content, but with very low risk. For example, social media posts that like contain some funny, entertaining content. Or we can have cases like where we have like somewhat higher or moderate risk, but very low visibility. Like, for example, some sort of like disclaimers or like emails that people may not necessarily like review. And this is where we can see the scoring fitting best, because it provides you the assurance that translations are checked and that the risk of issues is low, and it helps you optimize the human review. And depending on your case, these boxes might not be of equal size. This is just a visual representation, but in reality, the pieces where we need human review might be lower, especially as AI and LLMs are improving the quality. And depending on your use case, if you're in a highly regulated industry or like dealing with finances, in this case, probably your like sizes of the boxes will be different from the company that is localizing like entertainment content, which may have like much lower risk. But this is exactly where scoring can help you in both cases, but figuring out the right strategy and balancing the effort with the risk. And if you look at this from a different perspective, then on this graph, we try to visualize something different. And on the vertical bar, we have the acceptance rate, which shows how often people are accepting translations done by each other. And in general, quality is a very tricky topic, very subjective topic, because we're all humans and we all have different preferences. Some of us prefer like really short, concise copy. Some of us may prefer like more informal or like formal tone of voice. And this is where the variance is coming from. So if people are reviewing each other translations, there'll be some minor cases where they disagree. And in general, from like past researches that we see that if on average humans tend to agree with each other on in roughly like 90%. So this is what we treat as human level quality. When translations performed by like humans or AI like are accepted by humans in 90% cases. And then depending on the features, like on approaches that you use, if you're translating like with LLMs, with AI, and you don't have context, or the cases where you do provide the context, or the cases where you even customize AI with your past translation examples, you can reach different degrees of acceptance rate for quality. But basically what it means that in successful scenarios, if you look at 75 plus cases, it means that 75% plus like 80% of your content will be non-edited by humans, which means that it's mostly already good. And if we can, what does it tell us if we combine this graph with the previous one together? It says us that, first of all, not all content can possess the same risk, and for some content it might be okay not to review everything. And this graph shows us that for the content that we are reviewing, if you approach it properly with context, we need to make the edits only for like 20% of the content, because the rest translations are already good. And this is where scoring comes in place, because scoring can help us to save the money and effort by focusing human effort on those 20% that matters, on those 20% of cases that have the highest risk of issues and that actually need to be reviewed. So it works very simple. And on this graph, let's imagine that we have like on the vertical axis, the cost of human review. And if a human is reviewing everything, like 100%, it means that we are paying the full cost. But if scoring helps us to see the lower scoring translations, the translations where there is some degree of doubt, and those are like just 20% of translations, because in the rest cases, AI failed to find any issue or ambiguity, it means that people can process and review like 80% less. So by focusing human effort, review effort on those 20% of the most ambiguous and challenging segments, which are likely to have issues, we can save the money and cost for people by skipping the review for the rest, while still AI can give us some assurance. So now we spoke. So far, we've spoken about the cost aspect, and we see that scoring can help us optimize the cost. And now I'll speak about the other dimension of triangular, which is quality. And I saw that a lot of you guys are voted that we have uncertainty about quality. So this is where scoring can help as well. And on the right side, we can see the screenshot from our UI that shows us the scoring. And it shows us the number 95, it's green. It shows that we subtract like 5 points because there is a minor issue, and it says that there is stylistic issue. And then the scoring gives us the guidance that the phrase is a little bit formal and less energetic than the source. So we base our scoring on MQM, and some of you guys probably know what is MQM. Some of you are hearing this concept for the first time. And basically, there are different ways how we can categorize the issues and come up with a score. And usually it's a very tricky task, because if you're shown these two translations, we can say like, oh, maybe this sounds like a little bit weird or odd for me, but how do you actually put it and quantify it and put it into a scale? So this is what basically MQM does, and it provides us with the rules on how we need to kind of categorize the issues and create that scale. So first of all, it gives us interpretability of scores because it defines the types of issues and the penalties. And in the previous example, we've also seen the reasoning, the comment that AI is giving us on what can be wrong. So we figured out that if we show just the customer, the users, the translations, and the scores, it's very hard to start believing that the scoring really works. But as soon as you see the reasoning, it becomes more obvious for users to see like, oh, I can see why like the AI thinks this way. Secondly, MQM is giving us severity issues, and it helps us quantify the issues. And there are 3 types of issues which define severity: critical, major, minor. The critical issues are the types of issues where we are missing words, like, or where meaning is changed. So basically, if you have the source and the target that doesn't convey the same meaning, this is where like we are flagging a critical issue. Major issues are also like quite big types of issues, like it can impact grammar, readability, like terminology. And then minor issues are like really like nuanced preferential issues, which present like rather small flaws, like unnatural phrasing or like some preferential changes because some people might prefer more friendly, like, or like less formal tone of voice. And then the MQM framework also defines the error typology, and it helps align the team because you see immediately what type of issues there are. And you can decide yourselves which types of issues are more important. Like if as a company, you don't know, like, for example, you know that you don't care about certain types of issues, like you don't care about like style or fluency, then it can help you like be guided so that you know what issues are important for you and which of them might be skipped during the review. And then we try to put all those insights, all those issues, and categorize them and rank the quality, putting it on a scale from 0 to 100. 100 means that this is a good translation. This is the translation where AI failed to find any issue, meaning that in AI world, it's perfect. And then we deduct points backwardly, depending on the type of issue that we found. So for each of these types of issues, critical, major, minor, we are deducting several points. 75 for critical, 25 for major, and 5 for minor. And then we also apply color coding. If there are only minor issues, highly preferential issues, we usually see scores in the range of like 80 to 100, and they're usually green. But if there is any major or critical issue, then the score will be below 80, because any major issue will drive it to 75 or less. And in this case, the scores will be red, and this is where we suggest our customers to guide it for human review. I'll give some examples later on so that we make it more obvious in terms of different categories of issues. And here it comes. Let's look at the 3 examples where scoring can be more concrete. So we can start with problem number 1, problem with design breaks. And probably all of you are like knowing, like if you're translating something or like localizing for the UI strings, that string overload can be like really bad issue because it can lead to poor UI where a string doesn't fit the screen and like making other teams upset and causing time waste and rework. And before we jump into solution, like solving this problem, in this case, it could be also important to explain why the issues happen in the first place. Like with humans, it could be like more apparent that like if there is no limit or like if there is no way to fit translation into the limit, then humans can like accept mistakes and make mistakes. But we also, during our conversations with customers, facing questions on like why do LLMs, for example, make mistakes when they are like surpassing the limit? And you can think about it this way, like imagine that you're asked to describe yourself in like 10, 15 words, or like that could be easy, but imagine that you need to describe yourself, like let's say in like 170 characters. You can approximate how talkative you need to be, but you can catch yourself in a situation when you started talking and generating text and you suddenly realize that, oh, I'm in a case where I either need not to complete the word or I'm risking like overshooting the limit. And this is what can happen with LLMs as well, with AI when it's translating text. And how do you fix it as a human? Like you reread it and you count the characters and you try to come up with a shorter translation. So this is where scoring is helpful as well. So in those cases, it doesn't always happen that AI can overshoot the limit during translation. But if it happens, then scoring could be helpful because it can catch this issue during the scoring stage. And in this case, we can see an example on the left where we can see a scoring issue and where it's like flagged as a critical issue because like we violated the design. And we have AI scoring that identified it. And basically there is just a check, does it comply with the limit or not? If it's comply with the limit, then translation can be automatically approved. But if the limit is overshoot, then there'll be issue identified, there'll be a score below 80, and it can be flagged as an issue design that needs to be reviewed. Our second type of issues that scoring can help with is the problems with not respecting glossary. So some companies are creating their terms to make sure that translations sound exactly in the way they want, or there may be legal requirements to translate things in certain way, or maybe they just want their brands to be like features named consistently. And not respecting glossary terms can result also in quite costly issues. It can lead to legal issues, rework, inconsistency in translations, and customers losing the meaning. So this is where scoring can help as well. And in this case, I'll try to illustrate it with a concrete example. So in this case, I added a term deposit to the glossary, and I want it to be translated as noguldījums in Latvian. And let's imagine that we are translating this source, open a new deposit in Latvian. And in this case, I created this example myself. I inserted the translation myself because it can be quite tricky to force AI to make mistakes during the translation, and you need to try different variants. So in this case, I inserted human translation and I asked AI to score it. And also it's quite challenging to show international examples. So I picked the word deposit so that in the translation, you can see that it's depositor and it doesn't sound like noguldījums. And we see that scoring flags an error. And it said that there is a term, the word deposit must be translated as noguldījums, etc., according to the glossary. So not only AI scoring learns from assets from the glossary, but it's also like capturing such issues. And when I revise the translation, I change it to atvērt jaunu noguldījumu and pay attention to the ending. I highlighted it in red because the term was noguldījums, but we changed that case to accusative case to noguldījumu. And when we rescore it again, we get a perfect score. So in this case, scoring sees that no tweaks are needed and the translation is just right. And then let's quickly look at the third example. with the style guides and the soulless translations. So some companies are investing a lot of effort into making sure that their content sounds the way they want. For example, they can be willing to translate something super formally or maybe in a very friendly tone of voice. Maybe they approach the young audience. And inconsistent voice can lead to confusing customer experience, like an off-brand experience. And this is where scoring is helpful as well. So for these purposes, for humans and also for AI translations, people are often creating style guides that describe the preferred tone of voice. And in this case, we created a very simple style guide saying that we want to translate for a fintech app targeting an audience and that we need to use very playful conversational tone of voice. And this time I picked another language. So we see the source, oops, the unicorn tripped, check your internet and retry, so very playful. And we try to translate it. And for those of you who don't speak Russian, there are two forms of you in Russian, formal you and informal you. And depending on which form you use, you might have different endings. So in this case, scoring flagged an issue and it gave this translation 75. And we see the explanation that the translation uses formal we form, which doesn't match the casual conversational tone required by the style guide. So it actually reads the context, is adapting to your preferences, and is flagging the issues. And once I change it, so for those of you who don't speak Russian, I just cut the endings, making it sound shorter for the informal you. And we see that the scoring also improved. And now we have a green score with 95. So I hope this illustrates examples and how scoring can be powerful and can work. But I also want you to feel it on the other side and understand how challenging this task could be. So in this case, I will show you 3 examples and I'll explain the context and I'll ask you to vote in the comments and show which option you prefer. And for context, we had the style guide and we asked AI to translate it friendly. And if you look at these examples, they are all pretty similar. It says, thank you for your order. Then it's giving some information that it's running a bit late. And it says that more information, more detail will follow. So could you please spend a few minutes and tell us which example you prefer? Come on, we had a lot of traction during the previous polls. I hope we are not losing you. Okay, I really like the traction. Thank you, guys. And we see that there are a lot of responses. We see that probably option 1 and 3 are more often preferred, whereas we also see that sometimes option 2 is preferred. And this is perfectly normal. And this is what we wanted to show you, because although these 3 examples, they convey the same meaning, they are slightly different. The first example is a little bit reassuring, kind of no action is needed, guys. The second example is more specific. It says like new estimate is Friday, October 24. The third example is empowering, like you can check and manage your delivery options here. So I agree with the Nancy's comment that it could be hard to score it without the source, but it's also very complicated to come up with examples that audience can see, like international audience can understand in the same language. So we simplified it a bit. But in this case, there is some healthy variance, and there is some minor disagreements between people who might prefer a little bit more specificity versus control versus brevity, and it's perfectly okay. And now I want to ask you guys to score quickly another translation, but in this case, we have the source and target. And instead of picking a variant, I want you to vote with thumbs up, thumbs down, so that you can vote yourselves and see like who from you like would accept this translation, thumbs up, and who finds this translation unacceptable or bad. Maybe we can also use the chat just with emojis. Okay, I see some thumbs down. Okay, I see the comment also from Sarah. That's good. Okay. That's great. We see that most of you guys are disagreeing here. And some of you will notice that they don't mean the same, which is right. In this case, if it was a translation or if it's a translation from English to another English variant, it changes the meaning because it says free returns without 14 days. But the second translation says that there are just no returns. It doesn't say that returns are free before 14 days. And maybe we can quickly score the second example, which should be hopefully pretty fast. With the same approach, thumbs up, thumb down. Who from you feels that this will be a correct translation or like a really bad translation? It might sound very obvious example, and that's okay. So we see that most of you agree that this is a bad translation and give us thumb down. And it's like a more obvious mistake, but this is a very serious mistake because in this case, we can actually create some compliance or like security risk if we misguide the users on the types of chargers. So why do we even ask you like to write these examples? And what we're trying to illustrate here is this, that there might be some variance across responses in some cases. And in the first example, where we have friendly tone of voice, like friendly tone of voice doesn't always guarantee the same result, and not all people see the friendly tone of voice equal. So there can be some nuances, where the tone can be friendly but assuring, and like there are some compromises with regards to brevity. So there are some preference level nuances that each of us may have, and it's okay. And we can have some healthy variability in responses. But in the second example, when I ask you to rate two translations where most of you disagreed and found them as really bad translations, we see much more convergence in responses. And we see that there are no preferential changes and ambiguity when we are speaking about bad translations. So similarly to this, and this is similarly how like AI works, and there can be some small variance in the translation score, depending on which reasoning you use. Like if you are a person who looks and like tries to search for brevity, for clarity, for empowering tone of voice, in this case, AI can suggest similarly, and it can say like, oh, maybe this translation could be slightly more friendly, or maybe it could sound more empowering. So when we speak about minor issues, we are speaking about preferences. And this is where we shouldn't try like look for perfection and always aim to have 100 scores. It's okay to have some healthy variability. And in this case, even if you speak like about 90, 95 score, they could be like perfectly good translations for some users, depending on the preferences. But if there are major issues, then there is much less variance. And this is where both humans and LLMs will see it, will spot the mistake. And so far, we talked about like how LLMs can help us to assess the quality, and we determined that LLMs and AI scoring can find really big major mistakes, and it can highlight some nice to have improvements and like as minor mistakes. And now we'll speak about the last dimension, which is speed. And this is where I would like to make a very quick demo finally, so that we can see all the things in practice. So this is my Lokalise project, and it's empty. We'll try to do everything from scratch, and I will try to create a new workflow that can guide us through translation stages. So in this case, I will go to workflows, click on create workflow, and I will define how exactly I want the content to be translated. So I'll pick the template. In this case, I'll say that I want my content to be translated by AI and later on reviewed based on the score. I'll use the template. And in the workflow, we need to define where it starts and the cadence where it starts. So basically, in this case, I'm saying that starting from today or maybe like tomorrow, every time at special time at 9 a.m., I want to group all of my newly added content. And this is how I want it to be translated. So I'll be configuring the stages. In this case, I will pick Russian for translation. You can pick different languages here. I just want it to be fast. And I will say that I want to look for newly updated and added and updated content, which needs to be picked up by workflows and retranslated. So there is a step where we wipe out previous translations, if there are any, and then we take the new and updated content and translate it with AI. And in this case, we can provide additional instructions and context to AI. And we see that scoring is automatically enabled for this task. So during translation stage, we'll return you the translations and the scores. And during the review stage, we can select the threshold, that's the main addition, where you can say, based on which threshold we want to review the content. So if you're on a very cautious side, you can say that I want to review everything, or I want to review translations that are like below like 90, 95 score. But based on what we've shared before, if you're okay with minor preferential issues, then the suggested threshold will be 80. And it will mean that any translations that have at least one major critical issue that can alter the meaning, then or like violate the character limits will be spotted and checked. And in this case, there are some extra settings in terms of due dates for human linguists, and we can also pick the reviewers. In this case, it will be just myself, and I will activate this workflow. We can see that it's live, but it's waiting for the content, and it's waiting for the time when it actually can be run, which is tomorrow, 9 a.m. We'll start with uploading content. So I'll upload a file that has 13 keys. And in a bit, we should see it populated in the editor. So we see that we have some content created, and it also sounds like a fintech app. So we probably don't want to wait till tomorrow, 9 a.m. for scoring to trigger. And in this case, I'll just trigger it manually, and I will run the workflow. But assuming that it's tomorrow, 9 a.m., it should be run automatically without human involvement. And this is where we can start to see that this workflow is in progress. And the current step, that's the first step, is that there is AI translation step when we're actually translating content. We can go to tasks, and we can see that there is one currently running AI translation task that is translating 13 keys into Russian. And we need to give it a little bit of time so that it completes translations. Before translations are available, you can see the icon. For example, if you don't run scoring in tasks, you can see this icon and you can basically score any translation. But the translations that are coming through AI translation tasks will be scored automatically. All right, so now it works as a charm. You can see that the translations were populated along with their scores, and we can click on scores and see like which translations are perfect and which translations have some issues, for example, that we shown in the previous screen. And if you check the tasks, we'll see that there is a review task created. If you compare the two, we see that the AI translation task had 13 keys. We uploaded 13 keys and 77 words, but our Russian translation has the task human review for Russian has much less words, which is 48. And if we click on those translations, we will see that all of these translations are having scores below 80 as we configured the workflow. So this is how you can save the effort by reviewing only those. And once people review those translations, they can fix the translation, or they can accept it as is, or they can fix the translation. They can try to change it, and when they change it, they can also try to rescore. So I've done a really like simple change. They can click their score, and they will see the new score for translation. And it can take sometimes a bit of time because we are also like asking LLMs and AI to provide the reasoning. So once everything is completed, we see that AI translation task, the human review task is in progress. But once everything is completed and human manually confirms each segment, or in this case, I can confirm it in bulk, our workflow will be also completed and translations will be ready for publishing. So in this case, it's basically a very simple workflow. We can run translation with scoring, and depending on the score, we can see what needs to be automatically approved or where review can be encouraged. And this is where people can agree or disagree with scoring, because like basically, as we showed in the previous example, there can be cases when it's okay to disagree, especially in case of minor issues. Or it can be cases where humans have asymmetric context, and this is also fine. Maybe you'll see that the character limit was overshoot, but any shorter translation will harm the quality. So in this case, maybe the humans will decide to keep this longer translation, and UI can be expanded as well. So the key takeaways are that we started with translation quality and assurance and different challenges, and we basically looked at it from 3 perspectives. And scoring can help us on the cost side, because it can help us move from reviewing everything to reviewing what matters. On the quality side, it's context-aware of terminology and style, and can help us get some measurable confidence in quality. And we also spotted that LLMs are trying really hard to find the issues, and if they fail to find any issue, then in this case, this is usually a good translation, or at least there is like no ambiguity changes in the meaning. And in terms of speed, it helps with improved productivity. It can help you to either cut review cycles, or if you're still reviewing everything, it can give your reviewers insights on what need to be fixed. And this whole 3 features work together. We suggest to try holistic AI experience because things are intertwined. We need to be using AI translations, and they can be powered with AI scoring. And then with the help of style guides and glossary, we can improve the quality, and then the workflows can bring the speed. So I hope you enjoyed this part of the webinar. And this is where I will transition it to Marta to guide you through the next steps.
Thank you, Alesia. So we have a lot of questions coming up on the Q&A box. I will remind you to please continue bringing them. Any question we don't reply now, we'll send you after the answer. And also, thank you very much, everyone, for engaging during the whole presentation on the chat. It's really nice to see when that happens. So before we move on to the Q&A section, I wanted to remind you that in September last month, we had a webinar that was also related with AI. Actually, it was about custom AI profiles and customizing AI with our engineering manager, Sasho. And next week, we will have another webinar that is called Ship by Lokalise. It's actually a new series that we're starting out that we launched today. And so next week, we're going to be showing some stuff about this transition scoring feature that Alesia just talked about, and other features. So just reminding you about this. And now, without further ado, we're going to go into the Q&A section. And yeah, let me see what we have here. I'm going to read some questions out loud, and then Alesia and our colleague Adam will reply to them. So I see one question that says, can I empower my freelance translators to run the QA on their own and make adjustments? Maybe we can answer that one.
Yep, sure. So if I understand the question right, then the person is interested in scoring the translations that are performed by humans, by freelancers. And in this case, it's not part of the automated workflow that we've shown, where AI translations can be automatically generated and scored and routed for review. But in this case, you can ask linguists or yourselves to trigger scoring in the editor one by one. Next to each translation, there is a scoring icon. If there is no score, there is an icon, search icon to score. And you can check those translations manually one by one. And you can also see the scoring guidance for the inspiration.
Thank you, Alesia. I'm gonna move on to the next one. This one says, is it possible to adjust the severity of issues ourselves? For branded content, preferential changes are important.
So it's not possible right now to define which categories you want to exclude or include or change the severity. You can just change the threshold based on your preferences. And in this case, if you want to check for translations in case they have any minor issues, you just need to raise the threshold in the workflows and review everything that is below 100 score. But in future, we are closely monitoring the customer feedback and needs on the topic, and we'll see how often and how many customers have expressed the similar need. So please do share with us your feedback after trying the feature.
Great, thank you. We have another question. Well, there is a question that maybe it's quite easy to reply. Hello, we're not yet using Localize, tried yesterday, but got a bit lost in all those features. Can I get a personal demo or consulting?
In this case, we suggest to reach out to our support team in the chat, and they can help you there, or they can assign you to one of our sales people who can also deep dive into your use case and suggest some best practices. Get in touch.
And just as a general answer as well, we will be sending follow-up emails after this webinar, so we'll get in touch with you for sure. Okay, we have still some time and I think we can reply to more questions. So let me go and answer this one. So how do we identify where the 20% content for review is?
So in this case, we ask AI to find to check every translation and to look for issues. And we are providing this MQM framework, like asking AI to look for specific types of issues, like whether like the meaning is the same, like the style fits, like matches the tone of voice defined in the style guide, like the term. So it's really personalized. And in this case, the way we designed the feature is that we are asking LLMs to find an AI the issues. And we found us also in a situation like after different, like multiple like tests and iterations, we experimented for many months, that usually AI is trying very hard to find in the issues. So in this case, in some cases, they can flag that there is potential risk of issue, or they can say that, oh, translation looks good, but maybe the source is unclear, and maybe it's like worth double checking. So here we are on the side where if AI really fails to find any issue, then it's usually like a good translation because they're specifically trained, like in this ask to look for issues. And this is where like roughly 20% comes from. We see from our tests, internal tests, and we see from feedback provided by our customers that they get roughly like 20-30% of content for review when they use the scoring, which has scores below 80. But it's also dependent on your assets and the style guides and terms that you provide. Because maybe just to illustrate it easily, there can be a complexity with challenging or like multiple like requirements that are mutually excluding each other. And the more specific you make your style guides and glossary, and the more requirements you give, like you ask LLMs to stick with, there is a high chance that not all requirements can be met. And just a simple case can be, let's say you ask AI to translate something very friendly, And at the same time, you insert the glossary term, which is very formal, and which can make translation sound like awkwardly if the term is used. Or maybe you're like asking AI for creativity, but you implemented very short character limits. So the more restrictions you give to AI, the more likely that it's not possible to satisfy all of those requirements. And the more likely that you also see some errors, potential errors being flagged, saying like, oh, like that this translation fits this and this requirements, but it misses one of those requirements. So 20-30% is an average that we see from customers. But if you loosen your requirements, you can actually see less content being sent for human review. And if you stricten your requirements, and especially if you put ambiguous requirements for the AI, in this case, you can see like slightly more issues being captured and slightly more content being sent for review.
Great. Thank you, Alesia. I'm going to pick another one. Okay, so we have this one that says, does the scoring learn over time based on our actions?
This is a very good question. So one thing that we haven't shown here is the connection with our other feature. So for those of you who might have seen the previous webinar of my colleague Sasha, he had a webinar where he explained how it's possible to customize AI and provide it with past examples so that it sticks to your tone of voice and like word choices and translations better. In this case, the feature can work in a combination with scoring as well. So by default, AI will kind of learn and take the context from the style guide and glossary. But if you use it in a combination with our other feature that allows you to customize AI on your past translations, then the scoring is also becoming aware of the past translations and past preferences. And in this case, the more you translate, the more edits you're making, the more edits our system recognizes. And scoring also becomes more forgiving for those edits because I understand that this is how the content is like preferably translated. So in this case, when we score something, we are asking AI to find any issues, but at the same time, we're providing an example saying that this is how exactly customers wanted something to be translated. So it can take into account that customer preferability over certain types of style and tone of voice. So I suggest checking the previous webinar and also I encourage you to sign up for another beta called Custom Layer Profiles to try these two features together.
Thank you, Alesia. Actually, we left some links in the chat related to that. So we'll send obviously an email, but if you need, you have them at your disposal. And since we are running out of time, we're going to answer last question. And this one says, I was told that custom empty models, sorry, I will repeat this. I was told that with custom empty models, the style guides won't play a role anymore. So where does the style guide used by the scoring feature come from?
So there are two cases. If we use scoring without custom MT, without customized translations, and there are no, there is no other context, then style guide is very useful because in this case, style guide defines the rules, how we want something to be translated by AI, whether it needs to be translated in a friendly tone of voice or, for example, like more formal tone of voice. And in this case, scoring uses the same context. So in this case, both AI will use the style guide during translation, and AI will also use the style guide during the scoring stage. But if there is a case where you're customizing your translations or AI with your past translations, then in this case, customizing AI with your past translations could be more superior than the style guide. Because style guide says like, do this and this, please use friendly tone of voice and like empowering tone of voice, etc., etc. But when we customize on past translations, AI, it can see precise examples. how we want something to be translated. So instead of just following the rules, they will see like, oh, actually we want these words to be used this way, and this is what customers find like the most valuable in each case. So it's either or. But if you're either style guide or customization on the past translations, but if you customize AI on your past translations, then scoring will be using exactly the same context, and it will see the past examples, and it will take into account the preferences from the past translations. So depending on the feature set that you're looking for, you can use either translations with style guide, and scoring will be aware and will be checking against the style guide, or you can customize AI with your past translations, and AI will digest the style from the past translations and will be using the same style from the past translations during the scoring stage.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Alesia, and thank you everyone that joined. We're going to wrap it up here. We have a few questions that were not answered, but due to time, we're going to wrap it up here and send you the answers to the questions that were not answered. Thank you, and see you in the next webinar. Goodbye.
Awesome. Thank you for being such a great audience and answering the polls.